A young nurse bathed a millionaire in a coma. But when he suddenly woke up, the sterile quiet of the penthouse suite at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City was a world away from the cheerful chaos Lily Carter usually thrived in on the general wards. But for the past 3 months, this hushed luxury had been her domain. Her patient, Nathan Sterling, occupied the state-of-the-art bed, a still figure amidst the quiet hum of monitors. At 50, even in the deep stillness of a coma, the sharp lines of his face spoke of a man accustomed to command, a titan of the tech industry silenced by a brutal multi-car pileup on the FDR Drive 6 months prior. Lily, 24, moved with practiced gentleness. Her life had been a series of transitions from the anonymity of the state foster care system to the demanding rhythm of nursing school, fueled by a quiet determination and an innate empathy she couldn't quite explain. She'd always felt adrift, searching for an anchor she couldn't name. Nursing provided purpose, a way to channel the deep well of care within her. Landing this private duty position felt like both a blessing and an immense pressure. The Sterling family, though distant and represented primarily by lawyers and curt instructions, expected miracles. Each morning began the same way, checking vitals, liaising with the rotating team of specialists, and then the bathing ritual. It was the most intimate part of her duties, a task some nurses found uncomfortable with unconscious patients, but Lily approached it with reverence. She'd fill the basin with precisely warmed water, adding a drop of unscented, hypoallergenic soap. As she carefully washed Nathan's unresponsive limbs, his chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of the ventilator, she found herself talking to him, not about medical charts or dosages, but about the city outside his sealed window, the changing leaves in Central Park, the funny thing a patient down the hall had said. "Mr. Sterling," she'd murmur, her voice soft in the large room, wiping a bead of perspiration from his temple. "It's a beautiful fall day today. Crisp air, sunshine, the kind of day that makes you feel alive." She paused, sponge hovering over his still hand. "You need to feel it again. You need to wake up." She knew little about him beyond the headlines. Nathan Sterling, the visionary founder of Ether Technologies, divorced, fiercely private, rumored to be brilliant but ruthless. No family visited regularly, just lawyers discussing his vast estate and doctors offering grim prognosis. The official narrative was that the accident had caused severe traumatic brain injury. Hope, the neurologist said cautiously, was a diminishing commodity. Yet Lily held on to it. Perhaps it was the faint scar she noticed above his left eyebrow, almost hidden by his hairline, that seemed incongruous with his powerful image. Or maybe it was the way, sometimes, she imagined a flicker deep within his closed eyelids when she spoke of simple things: the taste of coffee, the warmth of the sun. She felt an inexplicable connection to this silent man, a pull she attributed to her own deep-seated longing for connection, for family. Her own past was a patchwork of foster homes and the sprawling, impersonal St. Jude's orphanage. She had aged out of the system with little more than resilience and a worn photograph of an unknown young woman, her mother, the nuns had told her, found tucked into her receiving blanket. The woman in the photo had kind eyes, a gentle smile, and a look that Lily sometimes thought she recognized in her own reflection. There was no name, no history, just that faded image and the gnawing emptiness of not knowing. She tried searching databases, submitting her DNA to ancestry sites, but hit only dead ends. The lack of roots sometimes felt like a physical ache. Caring for Nathan Sterling, in a strange way, felt like tending to a void, hoping life might inexplicably bloom from it. One rainy Tuesday, as the city noise was muffled by the downpour against the thick windows, Lily was performing passive range of motion exercises on Nathan's left arm. She was talking about a stray cat she'd seen sheltering under an awning near her apartment building in Queens. "Real survivor, this little guy," she said, gently flexing his elbow. "Doesn't give up." As she moved to his hand, her fingers brushed against the cool metal of a simple silver band he wore on his right ring finger. It wasn't flashy. It looked old, perhaps sentimental. She'd often wondered about its significance. Suddenly, beneath her touch, his fingers twitched. Not the involuntary spasms she sometimes saw, but a distinct, subtle movement. Lily froze, her breath catching. She watched his face intently. Was it just a reflex? She waited, heart pounding against her ribs. Nothing more happened. She slowly continued the exercises, her senses hyper-alert. The quiet hum of the monitors seemed louder now, the silence heavier. For the first time in months, the stillness in the room felt less like absence and more like anticipation. Before the accident, Nathan Sterling's life had been a relentless climb. Born into old New York money, the kind that valued lineage and quiet influence over flashy tech disruption, Nathan had always been an outlier. His brilliance was undeniable, but his passion lay not in managing inherited wealth, but in building something new, something revolutionary. He defied his stern, disapproving father, Harrison Sterling III, a man who saw Nathan's fascination with computers in the late 80s and early 90s as a frivolous distraction from the family's banking empire. He'd met Clara Hayes during his brief, rebellious stint bartending in the East Village after dropping out of Yale for the second time. She was an art student, vibrant, funny, utterly unimpressed by his family name, which he'd initially tried to hide. She saw him the dreamer, the innovator, the man beneath the stifled air. They fell deeply, incandescently in love, sharing cheap pizza, dreaming big dreams in her tiny walk-up apartment. For 2 years, it was their world against everyone else's. Then Clara discovered she was pregnant. Nathan was ecstatic, ready to face his family, ready to build a life with her. Consequences be damned. But Harrison Sterling III intervened with chilling precision. He didn't shout or threaten violence. His methods were far more insidious. He presented Nathan with an ultimatum veiled in concern. Marry Amelia Van Doren, the daughter of a rival banking family, securing a merger that would save the Sterling fortune from a hidden, impending crisis Harrison himself had partially created, or risk utter ruin not just for himself, but implicitly for Clara and the child. He painted a grim picture of a life of struggle for them, cut off from all resources, while subtly reminding Nathan of his obligations. Young, overwhelmed, and conditioned to ultimately bow to his father's will despite his rebellions, Nathan made the devastating choice he would regret for the rest of his life. He tried to explain to Clara, tried to promise he would find a way back to her, but the betrayal cut too deep. Heartbroken and terrified of the Sterling family's power, Clara refused his attempts at support. One tearful night, she told him she needed to disappear to protect their child from the life he was choosing. She made him promise not to look for her, fearing his family's interference. And then she vanished. Nathan married Amelia. The marriage was cold, transactional, producing no children and ending in a quiet, expensive divorce a decade later. He poured his grief and frustrated energy into ether technologies, building it into a global giant. He became the ruthless businessman his father had, in a twisted way, wanted him to be, albeit in a different field. But success felt hollow. The wealth, the accolades, none of it filled the void Clara had left. He tried to find her, breaking his promise almost immediately. He hired private investigators, discreetly at first, then more desperately as years turned into decades. They found traces a hospital record of a birth in a small town upstate under a false name. Whispers of a young woman matching Clara's description, working odd jobs, moving frequently. But she was always one step ahead, seemingly determined to stay hidden. He never knew about the orphanage. Clara, fearing the Sterlings would eventually track her down, had covered her tracks completely, leaving her baby girl with nothing identifiable except that one cherished photo and a name, Lily. The silver ring he wore was Clara's, a simple band they'd bought together from a street vendor in Greenwich Village. It was the only tangible piece of her he had left. His father, Harrison, passed away 5 years ago, never acknowledging the damage he'd caused, maintaining the narrative that he'd saved Nathan from a youthful indiscretion. Nathan's relationship with his remaining family, a colder, more socially adept younger sister, Cynthia, and her family was polite but strained. They'd benefited from his success but kept a careful distance from the man they considered brilliant but emotionally closed off. The accident had happened on a bleak February afternoon. A sudden ice storm, a chain reaction collision. Nathan's driver was killed instantly. Nathan himself suffered multiple injuries, the most severe being the blow to his head. In the depths of the coma, his mind wasn't blank. It was a swirling vortex of regret. Images of Clara, her laugh, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the devastating look in her eyes when he told her about Amelia, played on repeat. Sometimes faint sound from the present world would filter through traffic, monitor beeps, and, increasingly, a soft, calm voice. A voice that sometimes spoke of sunshine and stray cats. A voice that felt familiar, like an echo of a forgotten melody. He couldn't place it, couldn't grasp it, but in the endless dark, it was a flicker of warmth, a thread pulling him toward the surface he couldn't yet breach. The twitch Lily had felt wasn't just a random nerve firing. It was a subconscious response to the proximity of a presence that resonated deep within his fractured consciousness, stirred by the memory held within the silver ring her fingers had brushed against. The subtle finger twitch became a focal point for Lily. She started paying even closer attention, documenting every slight flicker, every perceived change in his breathing patterns when she spoke. The neurologist remained cautiously pessimistic, attributing the movements to random nerve impulses common in coma patients. "Don't get your hopes up," Nurse Carter, Dr. Ramirez, the lead physician, advised kindly but firmly. "We see these things. It rarely signifies a true change in cognitive state." Lily nodded, maintaining her professional demeanor, but inwardly she disagreed. It felt different. She continued her one-sided conversations, now infusing them with more detail, more life. She described the plot of a novel she was reading, the taste of the terrible coffee in the hospital cafeteria, the progress of the stray cat she'd started leaving food out for. She spoke about her own dreams of maybe, someday, finding information about her mother. One afternoon, nearly 4 months into her assignment, Lily was changing the dressing on a minor bedsore on Nathan's heel. The room was quiet, bathed in the pale light of a cloudy November day. She was humming softly, a tune she couldn't place, but often found herself humming perhaps something she'd heard long ago at the orphanage. Suddenly, a low groan emanated from the bed. Lily froze, her hands stilling. It wasn't the ventilator. It was a human sound, rough and unused. Her eyes shot to Nathan's face. His eyelids fluttered, then impossibly slowly they opened. They weren't focused at first, darting weakly around the room before settling, hazy and uncertain, on her face. Lily's breath hitched. Her training kicked in check pupils, assess orientation, but her heart was hammering against her ribs. She dropped the gauze square she was holding. "Mr. Sterling?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Can you hear me?" His lips moved, but only a dry, rasping sound emerged. He blinked slowly, his brow furrowing in confusion. His gaze intensified, locking onto her eyes. There was a spark there, a flicker of dawning awareness fighting through layers of fog. "You." His voice was a thread, barely audible, raw from months of disuse. "Who?" Lily leaned closer, her professional calm battling a wave of overwhelming emotion. "It's okay, Mr. Sterling. You're in the hospital. You've been asleep for a long time. I'm Lily. I'm your nurse." He continued to stare, his blue eyes, cloudy but undeniably intelligent, searching her face. He tried to lift his hand, a weak, shaky movement. Lily instinctively reached out, steadying it. His fingers, surprisingly cool, closed weakly around hers. "No," he rasped again, stronger this time, his gaze fixed on her eyes. A strange mix of confusion and something akin to wonder flickered across his face. "Not Lily, nurse. My Lily." His grip tightened slightly, a desperate, questioning pressure. Clara's eyes. Lily felt a jolt, sharp and confusing. Clara? Who was Clara? She gently tried to pull her hand away, attributing his words to post-coma confusion, delirium. "Mr. Sterling, you're disoriented. It's okay. Let me get the doctor." But he held on, his gaze unwavering. "The picture," he whispered, his breath catching. Your mother. Clara." Lily froze. The picture, the only link to her past. How could this man, waking from a 6-month coma, know about the picture, know the name Clara? Her mind raced, disbelief warring with a sudden, terrifying possibility. She stepped back, pulling her hand free, her heart pounding not just with shock, but with a dawning, impossible dread. "You're mistaken," she said, her voice shakier than she intended. I don't know anyone named Clara. I grew up in an orphanage." Nathan's eyes filled with a raw, heart-wrenching emotion, anguish, disbelief, and a glimmer of desperate hope. He struggled weakly, trying to push himself up, the monitors beside his bed starting to beat more insistently as his heart rate climbed. "No," he insisted, his voice gaining a painful clarity. "St. Jude's. Upstate. She wouldn't tell me. Protect you." He gestured weakly towards the silver ring on his own hand. Clara wore this. Before I lost her. Before I failed her." The room started to spin. St. Jude's. Clara. The picture. It couldn't be possible. This tech billionaire, this stranger she had bathed and cared for, couldn't be connected to her fragmented past. It was delirium, a cruel coincidence. Yet the conviction in his eyes, the raw pain in his voice, felt terrifyingly real. The monitors shrilled louder. Lily slammed the nurse call button, her mind reeling, the carefully constructed walls around her past suddenly threatening to crumble. Dr. Ramirez and other nurses rushed in, their faces etched with concern and surprise at the sudden commotion from the room that had been silent for so long. Nathan Sterling was awake, and the world had just tilted on its axis. The immediate aftermath of Nathan's awakening was a whirlwind of medical activity and cautious optimism. Dr. Ramirez and his team ran batteries of tests, assessing cognitive function, motor skills, and the long road to recovery that lay ahead. Nathan was weak, easily fatigued, and prone to bouts of confusion, but the core of his intellect was clearly emerging from the fog. His insistence on Lily's identity, however, was initially dismissed by the medical team as confabulation, a common phenomenon where the brain fills memory gaps with fabricated or distorted information after trauma. "It's understandable, Lily," Dr. Ramirez explained gently in the hallway. He's latching onto a familiar face, mixing memories. His brain is rewiring itself. Don't read too much into it. But Lily couldn't dismiss it. St. Jude's. Clara. These weren't random words. She found herself hovering near his room even when off-duty, observing him through the glass panel, her mind a chaotic jumble of doubt, fear, and a sliver of terrifying hope. Could this man, this powerful, distant figure, truly be the father she'd subconsciously yearned for? The idea felt both ludicrous and strangely resonant. As Nathan's lucidity improved over the following days, his story remained consistent, though fragmented. He spoke of Clara Hayes, the art student with the infectious laugh. He described their whirlwind romance, hiding it from his imposing father. He spoke, with palpable shame, of the pressure, the arranged marriage, Clara's disappearance, and his futile, decades-long search. "She left you at St. Jude's?" he asked one afternoon, his voice still raspy but filled with pained urgency. "Did she leave anything? A note? Anything?" Lily hesitated, then nodded numbly. "A photograph. Of her. That's all." Nathan closed his eyes, a single tear escaping, tracing a path down his temple. "I hired investigators for years," he whispered. "They checked birth records, hospitals. They never found St. Jude's connected to her. She must have used another name, covered her tracks completely. She was so afraid of my father." He showed Lily the silver ring. "We bought this together, on Bleecker Street. She loved street fairs." He looked at Lily, his gaze intense. "You have her eyes, the shape, the color. Maybe a little bit of her stubbornness, too." A faint, sad smile touched his lips. Lily remained outwardly composed, the consummate professional, but inside she was turmoil. His story felt real, heartbreakingly so. Yet the implications were staggering. If he was her father, he was also the man who, according to his own account, had chosen wealth and family duty over her mother and her. Abandonment wasn't just a circumstance of her birth. It was a choice he had made. The hospital administration became aware of the situation. A potential personal connection between a high-profile patient and his private nurse raised ethical questions and concerns about professional boundaries. Lily felt the scrutiny, the whispers among colleagues. Adding another layer of complexity, Nathan's sister, Cynthia Sterling Ashworth, arrived from Connecticut. Tall, impeccably dressed, with eyes that assessed everything coolly, she swept into the hospital's suite, radiating polite skepticism. "Nathan, darling," she said, air-kissing near his cheek. "Wonderful news about your recovery. Though Dr. Ramirez tells me you have some rather fanciful notions." Her gaze flickered towards Lily, sharp and dismissive. "This young woman seems competent, but perhaps the stress is getting to you?" Nathan, though weak, met his sister's gaze firmly. "It's not fanciful, Cynthia. It's the truth. Lily is Clara's daughter." "My daughter?" Cynthia merely raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Clara Hayes? That girl from decades ago?" "Nathan, really. Grief and trauma play tricks on a mind. Let's focus on your recovery, shall we?" She clearly viewed Lily as an opportunist, a potential threat to the Sterling legacy and fortune. The tension was suffocating. Lily knew she couldn't continue like this, suspended between disbelief and a yearning she dared not acknowledge. The uncertainty was eating away at her. Finally, summoning all her courage during a quiet moment when Cynthia was away making calls, Lily faced Nathan. "Mr. Sterling," she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Your story, it aligns with the few details I know, but it's too much to comprehend based on resemblance and a ring. She took a deep breath. If this is true, there's only one way to be certain. I need proof. Undeniable proof. Nathan looked at her, his expression a mixture of pain and understanding. A DNA test, he said quietly. Of course. I'll arrange it immediately. Whatever you need, Lily. The decision hung in the air, heavy with consequence. Getting the test arranged involved lawyers, hospital protocols, and navigating Cynthia's subtle attempts to dissuade Nathan. Think of the potential scandal. Nathan. The waiting period for the results stretched ahead, an agonizing limbo where Lily continued her nursing duties, caring for the man who might be her father, under the watchful, suspicious eyes of the woman who might be her aunt, all while grappling with the potential seismic shift in her own identity. The days leading up to the DNA test results were thick with unspoken tension. Lily maintained her professionalism, meticulously charting Nathan's progress, assisting with physical therapy, and coordinating with his medical team. But every interaction was freighted with the weight of the question hanging between them. She found herself studying his features when he slept, comparing the line of his jaw to her own reflection, searching for an undeniable link beyond the eyes her mother had apparently passed down. Nathan, for his part, seemed to tread carefully around her, sensing her internal conflict. He didn't push, didn't overwhelm her with pronouncements of fatherhood. Instead, he started sharing stories not just about Clara, but about his own life, his regrets, the hollowness of his success before the accident. He spoke of his father, Harrison, not with anger, but with a weary understanding of the man's flaws and fears. He talked about the tech world, the pressure, the isolation. It felt less like a plea for acceptance and more like an attempt to bridge the vast chasm of lost years, offering pieces of himself, hoping she might see the man behind the myth and the mistake. Cynthia continued her visits, her presence a constant, subtle pressure. She'd bring Nathan meticulously arranged fruit baskets, talk about society events he was missing, and pointedly ignore Lily or address her only with curt instructions. Lily overheard snippets of hushed phone calls Cynthia made in the hallway, unbelievable situation, potential gold digger, protecting Nathan's interests. It fueled Lily's own anxieties, making her question her own motives. Was there a part of her, buried deep, that was drawn to the sterling name, the wealth, the sudden possibility of belonging to something grand? The thought shamed her. Finally, the day arrived. A representative from the lab, accompanied by Nathan's lawyer and a hospital administrator, delivered the sealed envelope. The air in the private suite crackled. Cynthia stood stiffly by the window, feigning disinterest. Lily felt numb, her hands cold. Nathan looked at Lily, his expression unreadable. "Do you want to open it?" he asked quietly. Lily shook her head, unable to speak. He took the envelope, his hand trembling slightly as he broke the seal. He unfolded the single sheet of paper, his eyes scanning the clinical text. Lily watched his face, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her ears. His eyes closed for a long moment. When they opened, they were glistening. He looked directly at Lily, and the simple, quiet confirmation in his gaze shattered her carefully constructed defenses. "It's confirmed, Lily," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Probability of paternity, 99.999%. The clinical words hung in the air. Lily swayed slightly, gripping the back of a nearby chair for support. It was true. This man, her patient, was her father. The orphan narrative she had carried her whole life dissolved, replaced by a far more complex, painful reality. She wasn't just fatherless. She had been left behind. Cynthia let out a small, disbelieving scoff. "Well, isn't that something?" Her tone was laced with frost. Tears welled in Lily's eyes, tears of shock, relief, anger, and an overwhelming sense of grief for the life she never had, the mother she never knew, the father who had been absent. She couldn't look at Nathan, couldn't process the flood of emotions. Without a word, she turned and walked quickly out of the room, brushing past the startled lawyer and administrator. She found refuge in an empty stairwell, sinking onto the cool concrete steps, letting the sobs she'd held back for days finally break free. She wept for the little girl searching faces in crowds, for the teenager filling out forms that asked for parents' names, for the young woman who felt fundamentally untethered. A few minutes later, the stairwell door opened gently. Nathan stood there, leaning heavily on a cane, his physical therapist hovering anxiously behind him. He had clearly discharged himself from his therapy session. "Lily," he said softly. She looked up, her face tear-streaked. "Why?" she choked out. "Why didn't you find me? Why did you let your father? How could you just leave her?" The questions poured out, raw and unfiltered. Nathan didn't offer excuses. He slowly, painfully, lowered himself onto the step beside her. "There are no good excuses," he said, his voice heavy with decades of regret. "I let my father manipulate me. I broke my promise to her, and then I broke my promise to myself to find you both immediately. I let years go by, hiding behind work, telling myself the investigators were doing enough." He looked at her, his own eyes filled with pain. "Leaving Clara, letting you both go. It was the greatest failure of my life, and I've lived with it every single day." He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just sat there, offering the unvarnished truth of his weakness, his regret. He started talking more about Clara, filling in the gaps Lily had always wondered about: her love for painting sunflowers, her terrible singing voice but infectious laugh, her fierce independence. He spoke of the overwhelming guilt that had driven him, contributing to his ruthlessness in business, as if success could somehow atone for his personal failings. Lily listened, the anger still present, but now mingled with a profound sadness. This wasn't a simple villain. He was a flawed man haunted by his past. His confession, stripped bare of pretense, felt more real than any grand gesture could have. The healing wouldn't be instant, the connection wouldn't be easy, but in that concrete stairwell, amidst the echoes of shared grief, the first fragile threads of a different kind of bond began to form. She was still his nurse, helping him navigate his physical recovery. But now, there were also two broken people tentatively starting to navigate the wreckage of their shared history. The months following the DNA confirmation marked a slow, complex transition. Lily requested, and was granted, a transfer from Nathan's primary care team. While she still visited him daily, it was now as a daughter, albeit one still processing decades of absence and the weight of newfound knowledge. The dynamic shifted awkwardly. The familiar routines of nursing were replaced by hesitant conversations, shared meals in the hospital room that felt both intimate and strained, and the daunting task of figuring out what their relationship actually looked like. Nathan's physical recovery progressed steadily. Leaving the hospital penthouse suite for his sprawling Fifth Avenue apartment was another hurdle. The space felt cavernous and impersonal, a monument to the life he'd built without her or Clara. Lily found it difficult to be there initially, surrounded by the trappings of extreme wealth that symbolized, in part, the choice he had made long ago. Cynthia, after the DNA results, maintained a cool, cautious distance. The potential scandal she feared hadn't materialized, largely due to Nathan's insistence on privacy and Lily's own desire to avoid public attention. But her disapproval lingered, a reminder of the family dynamics that had originally torn Nathan and Clara apart. It was Nathan who made the most concerted effort to bridge the gap. He didn't try to buy Lily's affection with lavish gifts, sensing instinctively that would be the wrong approach. Instead, he shared more of himself. He unearthed old photographs, blurry snapshots of him and Clara, young and hopeful. He found a box of Clara's sketches she'd left behind in his apartment before disappearing. Drawings filled with life and emotion that made Lily feel closer to the mother she never knew. He spoke honestly about his regrets, not to absolve himself, but to help Lily understand the context of his choices, however flawed. He acknowledged the pain he had caused, the years lost. He listened, truly listened, when Lily spoke haltingly about her childhood, the loneliness of the orphanage, the constant feeling of being adrift. He learned about her struggles in nursing school, her passion for caring for others, her quiet resilience. One significant step was Nathan's decision to establish the Clara Hayes Foundation. It wasn't just about writing a check. He involved Lily from the outset. Together, they worked with lawyers and advisors to shape its mission, providing scholarships for underprivileged nursing students, offering support programs for young adults aging out of the foster care system, and funding arts programs in under-resourced communities honoring both Clara's passion and Lily's path. Pouring their energy into this shared project gave them a common purpose, a way to channel grief and regret into something positive. It allowed Lily to see Nathan use his resources and influence for good, actively working to create opportunities he had denied her mother. Forgiveness wasn't a sudden epiphany for Lily. It was a gradual softening, an understanding that grew with each shared story, each vulnerable admission, each collaborative effort on the foundation. Seeing Nathan's genuine remorse, his efforts to connect, and his commitment to honoring Clara's memory chipped away at the wall of resentment she had built. She realized that holding onto the anger hurt her as much as it punished him. She continued working as a nurse at Mount Sinai, finding solace and purpose in her career. Her colleagues, aware of the situation's broad strokes, treated her with respect, impressed by her grace under pressure. She occasionally joined Nathan for quiet dinners, visited museums he knew Clara had loved, and slowly began to navigate the complexities of being a Sterling, albeit on her own terms. She politely deflected Cynthia's occasional invitations to society events, making it clear her world was different. Nearly a year after Nathan had woken from his coma, the Clara Hayes Foundation held its inaugural fundraising gala. Lily stood beside Nathan, greeting donors and scholarship recipients. She wore a simple, elegant blue dress, a color Nathan had mentioned Clara loved. Looking around the room, seeing the tangible impact of the foundation, the young faces full of hope, Lily felt a sense of peace she hadn't thought possible. Later that evening, standing on a balcony overlooking the city lights, Nathan turned to her, his eyes reflecting the skyline. "Clara would have loved this," he said softly. "She would have been so proud of you, Lily. Not just for this, but for the woman you've become. Kind, strong, compassionate. Everything I wasn't brave enough to fight for back then." Lily looked at him, no longer just her patient, no longer just the source of her abandonment issues, but her father, flawed and regretful, yet trying to make amends in the twilight of his life. The ache of the past was still there, a faint scar tissue around her heart, but it no longer defined her. She reached out and tentatively placed her hand on his arm. "She would have been proud of you too, Dad," Lily whispered, the word Dad feeling foreign yet right on her tongue for the first time. "For finding your way back. For doing this." Tears welled in Nathan's eyes. He didn't try to hug her, respecting the space she still needed, but the look they shared was one of profound, fragile connection. He choked out, his voice thick with emotion. "You were the best part of me, Lily. The part one thought I'd lost forever." The city lights glittered below, witnesses to a quiet reconciliation. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. The scars remained. The lost years could never be reclaimed. But in the heart of New York City, a father and daughter, brought together by chance and tragedy, have found their way to a tentative, hopeful beginning, building a future on the foundations of forgiveness and a love rediscovered in the most unexpected of circumstances. Lily hadn't just woken her father from a coma. She had awakened his heart, and in doing so, had finally found her own anchor.